I heard them decide my fate through a door that was not fully closed. The narrow sliver of light from the hallway cut across the turkey carpet, a silent, unwavering blade, and the voices that drifted through it were just as sharp. "She will be grateful for anyone," my father, Sir Reginald, said, his tone a wretched mix of desperation and dismissal. "Ilara has no prospects. She is plain, she is 24, and she has the unfortunate habit of thinking. It has not served her well." A low murmur from my stepmother, Lady Beatrice, followed. "It is Rosamond he is coming to see, Reginald, the Duke of Blackwood. Do not trouble the waters with talk of Ilara. She will be an anchor, dragging us all down. Keep her out of sight." I stood in the cold shadows of the upper landing, a book held tight against my chest, its sharp corners digging into my palm. I did not move. I did not breathe. I simply absorbed the words, letting them settle into the hollow spaces inside me, the ones their casual cruelties had carved over the years. I was not an anchor. I was the ghost at their feast, the quiet, inconvenient remainder of my father's first marriage, a constant, faded reproach to my stepmother's glittering ambitions. My mother had been a scholar's daughter, and she had given me her love of books and her quiet disposition, two qualities deemed utterly worthless in the currency of the marriage market. Rosamond, my half-sister, had been gifted with Beatrice's dazzling beauty and charm, a porcelain doll destined for a velvet tray. I was the forgotten wooden peg doll, tossed in a corner. The catalyst for this hushed, frantic conference was a name that had been hanging in the air of our crumbling house for a week, heavy and portentous as a thundercloud. Blackwood. The Duke of Blackwood, a man spoken of in whispers, a figure of immense wealth and sorrow. He was a recluse, they said, since the tragic death of his younger brother a year prior. He was severe, cold, and utterly uninterested in society. Yet he was coming here, to our decaying little estate of Oakhaven, a place whose fences were rotting and whose ledgers bled red ink. He was coming, ostensibly, to look over the land he was considering purchasing from my father. All of it. Every last indebted acre. And, as part of the bargain my father was so desperate to strike, he was to look over Rosamond as well. My fate, as decided through the cracked door, was to be invisible. A simple enough task, as it was the role I had perfected over a lifetime. The day the Duke was to arrive, the house was thrown into a state of performative order. Beatrice had servants polishing silver that had not seen the light in a decade, and beating dust from carpets so threadbare it seemed a miracle they did not disintegrate. Rosamond was a vision in pale blue muslin, her golden hair artfully arranged, her cheeks flushed with a mixture of excitement and Beatrice's relentless coaching. I was tasked with arranging flowers, a suitably feminine and unobtrusive occupation. My hands, smudged with pollen and pricked by thorns, felt more honest than anything else in the house that day. I wore my plainest grey dress, a colour that allowed me to fade into the wainscoting. It was my armour. I was in the drawing room, placing a final spray of lavender on the mantelpiece, when I heard the carriage wheels on the gravel. A knot of dread and something unpleasantly like curiosity tightened in my stomach. Beatrice swept in, her silks rustling like a gathering storm. "Ilara, what are you still doing here? Go to the kitchens, help Mrs. Gable with the tea service, and for pity's sake, try not to be seen." Her command was a dismissal, as always, but it placed me precisely where I was not meant to be. I was carrying the heavy silver tray into the drawing room, my head bowed, my focus entirely on not letting the porcelain cups rattle, when he spoke. His voice was not the booming command I had expected. It was low and resonant, a quiet baritone that seemed to vibrate in the air itself. "You have an excellent library, Sir Reginald." I noted the collection of Roman histories as I passed. My father, flustered, mumbled something about a late uncle's passion. I set the tray down on a low table, my movements careful and slow. I could feel the weight of a gaze upon me, and it was not the fluttering, nervous glance of my father, or the sharp, assessing stare of my stepmother. It was something else entirely. Heavy, focused, unwavering. I risked a glance from beneath my lashes. The Duke of Blackwood, Alistair Finch, was not what I had imagined. The rumours had painted him as a brooding, Gothic figure, but the man standing by the window was simply still. He was tall and dressed in immaculate black, but it was a black of mourning, not of menace. His features were sharply defined, a strong jaw and a straight nose, but his eyes were what held me. They were a startling, clear grey, and they were fixed directly on me. It was the first look. It was not a glance, not the polite sweep a gentleman gives a servant or an overlooked spinster. It was a direct, searching look of such unnerving intensity that I felt my carefully constructed invisibility evaporate. He saw me. He did not just see a girl in a grey dress. He saw me, Ilara, and in his eyes I saw a flicker of recognition, surprise. I could not name it. It was as if he had been scanning a page of meaningless script and had suddenly found a word he understood. My breath caught. I felt a blush rise from my neck to my hairline, a hot tide of mortification, and something else, something I could not decipher. I curtsied, a clumsy, automatic gesture, and fled the room without waiting to be dismissed. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. In the hallway, I pressed my back against the cool wall, the silver tray forgotten. I had been seen. After a lifetime of perfecting the art of being invisible, one look from a stranger had stripped it all away. And the most terrifying part was the small, treacherous flicker of hope that had ignited in the darkness. The Duke's visit ought to have concluded with a proposal for Rosamond, or, at the very least, a clear sign of his intentions toward her. Instead, it ended with a polite, non-committal tour of the gardens and a promise from my father that the Duke was most impressed. Beatrice, however, was less convinced. Her lips were a thin, tight line of displeasure for the rest of the evening. The Duke had been civil to Rosamond, complimenting her needlework and her smile. But his attention, Beatrice complained, had been distractingly diffuse. I knew what she meant. I had felt the weight of that attention, like a physical touch, even when I was nowhere near the drawing room. Several times I had looked up from a book in the quiet of the morning room to find him standing on the lawn, his gaze fixed on the window where I sat. 2 days later, a note arrived. It was addressed to my father, but the footman who delivered it specified that it was a matter concerning me. Beatrice snatched it from the salver, her face a mask of suspicion. She broke the seal, a stark, simple B for Blackwood, and her eyes scanned the page. A strange, strangled sound escaped her. "He wishes to speak with Ilara," she announced, her voice laced with disbelief. "Alone. He requests her company to show him the path to the old Roman ruins on the north edge of the property. He understands she is knowledgeable about the local flora." The room fell silent. My father looked bewildered. Rosamond looked merely curious. But Beatrice looked at me, as if I had just sprouted horns. I, who was meant to be invisible, had been summoned. I, who was known for my books and my silence, was being sought out for my knowledge. It was preposterous. It was inexplicable. "You will go," my father said, after a moment's hesitation, a flicker of craven calculation in his eyes. If the Duke wanted to talk to the grey sparrow instead of the bird of paradise, who was he to argue? And so I went. I walked beside the Duke of Blackwood along the overgrown path, the silence between us stretching, taut and yet not uncomfortable. He was a man who seemed at ease with silence, and I, for my part, had always preferred it to meaningless chatter. I pointed out wild thyme and lady's mantle, my voice starting as a nervous tremor, but steadying as I spoke of things I knew, things that were real and solid and had nothing to do with social manoeuvring. He listened. He truly listened, asking intelligent questions, his grey eyes fixed on a sprig of foxglove I held, as if it were a diamond. "My mother was a botanist," he said, his voice quiet. "She would have appreciated your expertise. She taught my brother and me the names of all these. I had forgotten most of them." The mention of his brother was a small, dark stone dropped into the placid pool of our conversation. I saw the grief flicker in his eyes, raw and unguarded for a moment. "Forgetting is sometimes a mercy," I said softly, without thinking. "But remembering can be a way of keeping them close." He stopped walking and turned to me. The path was narrow, and he was so close I could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the subtle texture of the wool of his coat. "You understand," he said. It was not a question, it was a statement of fact, of discovery. That was the beginning of the conversations. He came to Oakhaven nearly every day that week. My family did not know what to make of it. Beatrice was beside herself, alternating between fury that I was usurping Rosamond's place and a grasping hope that I might somehow, miraculously, save them all. The official reason for his visits was always business with my father, but within the hour he would find me. In the library he pulled a leather-bound volume of Tacitus from the shelf. "You read Latin?" he asked, seeing the book in my hands. "Poorly," I admitted. "Then we shall have to read it together," he replied, and he sat down, not in the grand armchair, but on a low stool, so we were at eye level. And we read, our voices mingling in the dusty, sunlit air, the ancient words a bridge between us. We spoke of philosophy and agriculture and the quiet, desperate poetry of a life lived on the margins. In those moments, in the hushed sanctuary of the library, I was not plain, quiet Ilara. I was his equal. Then came the secret kindnesses. The autumn evenings were growing chill, and my small room in the unused wing of the house was draughty and cold. One morning I awoke to find a thick woolen shawl, the colour of deep heather, draped over the chair by my bed. It was not from my family, they would never have thought of it. There was no note. But when the Duke arrived that afternoon, I saw his gaze flick to the corner of the shawl I had brought down to wear, a barely perceptible nod of acknowledgement passing between us. It was a secret language, a gesture that spoke volumes more than any flowery compliment. A few days later, a first edition of a book of botanical prints we had discussed appeared on the hall table, addressed to me. My fingers trembled as I traced the embossed cover. Kindness from my own family had always come with invisible invoices, a debt of gratitude I was expected to pay. This felt different. It felt freely given. The charged moments were small, almost imperceptible, yet they felt like seismic events in my quiet world. His fingers brushed against mine as we both reached for the same book, a jolt of warmth that shot up my arm. He stood beside me at the window, watching the rain, and his proximity was a tangible presence, a heat and a steadiness that made my own breath catch in my throat. One afternoon, as we were finishing a chapter in the library, He looked at me, his expression serious. "My given name is Alistair," he said, his voice low. "I would consider it a great honour if you would use it." Alistair. The name felt foreign and impossibly intimate on my tongue. To use his first name was to step over a line, to shatter the formal etiquette that governed our worlds. It was a declaration, a claim. "And you must call me Elara," I whispered, the words feeling momentous. He smiled, a rare, breathtaking thing that transformed his severe features. "I have been calling you Elara in my own mind since the first moment I saw you." That night, for the first time, as I wrapped the heather-coloured shawl around my shoulders, I allowed myself to hope. It was a dangerous, fragile thing, a tiny flame in the vast emptiness of my future. But for the first time, the future did not feel empty. It felt like a book waiting to be opened, and Alistair, the Duke of Blackwood, was holding it out to me. The fragile hope I had nurtured was shattered by a single sheet of paper. It arrived not by footman, but was tucked inside a ledger my father had carelessly left open on his desk. My errand was to fetch his spectacles, a simple task, but my eye caught on the Duke of Blackwood's name, his signature a bold, decisive slash of ink at the bottom of a page. It was not a letter, it was a contract. My blood went cold as I read the stark, legalistic prose. It was an agreement for the sale of the Oakhaven estate and all its holdings to the Duke. But there was another clause, a section that made my breath seize in my chest. In exchange for a price far exceeding the land's value and the immediate forgiveness of all my father's considerable debts, Sir Reginald Pierce agreed to offer the hand of one of his daughters in marriage to the Duke. One of his daughters. We were commodities, listed like livestock in the transfer of property. I sank into my father's chair, the document trembling in my hand. Every kind word, every shared look, every thoughtful gesture from Alistair recontextualized itself in my mind, twisting into something ugly and calculated. The conversations, the books, the shawl, were they not acts of genuine connection, but merely a discerning buyer inspecting his potential acquisitions? Had he been weighing me against Rosamond, trying to decide which daughter would be the better bargain? The thought was a physical blow, winding me, leaving me gasping for air. The kindness I had believed to be freely given now seemed the most cruel part of the deception. He had not seen me. He had seen an asset, a clause in a contract to be fulfilled. The man I had started to believe in, the man who spoke of Roman histories and understood the language of silence, dissolved, replaced by a cold, shrewd nobleman securing his purchase. The trust I had so tentatively placed in him curdled into a bitter poison of betrayal. I did not know how long I sat there, the cold of the leather chair seeping into my bones, before I heard his voice in the hall. He had arrived for his now daily visit. A hot, furious energy surged through me, burning away the cold shock. I would not cower. I would not be the silent, overlooked girl in the grey dress. He had seen me, yes, but he had not seen this part of me, the part that would not be bartered and sold. I stood up, the contract clutched in my fist, and walked out of the study and into the main hall. He was standing there, handing his hat and gloves to a servant, a faint, almost smile on his lips as he saw me approach. The smile vanished as he saw my face. "Elara, what is it?" he asked, his voice full of concern that now sounded utterly false to my ears. I did not speak. I simply held out the crumpled piece of paper. He took it, his brow furrowing as he smoothed it out. He read it,
his expression unreadable, a mask of aristocratic composure falling over his features. When he looked up, his grey eyes were dark, shadowed. "Where did you find this?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet.
"Does it matter?" I retorted, my own voice shaking with a rage I had not known I possessed. "Is it true? Are we, nothing more than a clause in your acquisition of this land? A final piece of property to be transferred upon closing?" He took a step toward me, his hand outstretched. "Ilara, you must let me explain." "Explain what?" I cried, taking a step back, the betrayal a raw wound. "Explain how you deliberated between the beautiful one and the plain one. Did you make notes, a ledger of our respective qualities? What was it about me that tipped the scales? My knowledge of botany? My poor Latin? Was I simply the more cost-effective choice?" The words were acid on my tongue, but I could not stop them. He flinched as if I had struck him. The mask of composure cracked, and for a moment I saw a flash of raw pain in his eyes. "No," he said, his voice low and ragged. "No, it was never like that." "Then what was it like, Your Grace?" I asked, throwing his title at him like a stone. "Enlighten me. I am, after all, a woman who appreciates knowledge." He looked down at the contract in his hand, then back at me, his gaze unflinching. "The contract is real. Your father came to me, desperate. He was on the verge of debtor's prison, your stepmother intent on selling Rosamond to the highest and most unsuitable bidder. This," he gestured with the paper, "was his odious solution, a way to save his own skin and secure his family's future. I agreed to the terms because I saw the ruin he was facing, and I saw a way to prevent it." "How noble," I sneered. "It was not noble," he shot back, his voice hardening. "It was practical, it was business, and it had nothing to do with you." "Nothing to do with me? My name, my future, is written into it." "Yes," he said, his voice rising, resonating with a frustration that matched my own. "And that was the catastrophe I did not plan for. I came here to do a distasteful piece of business, to save a fool from himself and acquire a neighbouring property. I expected to deal with a grasping social climber and her beautiful, empty-headed daughter." He took a deep breath, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "I did not plan for you." He took another step, and this time I did not retreat. "I did not plan for a woman who speaks of Tacitus in a dusty library as if the words still live. I did not plan for a quiet, ferocious intelligence that sees the world not for what it appears to be, but for what it is. I did not plan for the way your eyes light up when you talk about flowers, or the way you hold a book as if it were a sacred object. I planned to buy an estate, Ilara. I did not, under any circumstances, plan to fall in love." The words hung in the air between us, stunning me into silence. My fury, which had been a raging fire, sputtered, leaving behind only the smoking embers of confusion and a wild, terrifying flicker of hope. He loved me. He had said it. But the contract, the cold, hard fact of it, still lay between us. "Everything you have done," I whispered. "The shawl, the books. Was that before or after you decided you were in love?" His expression softened, the pain returning to his eyes. The shawl was because I saw you shiver. The book was because I wanted to hear you talk about it again. The rest, all of it, was because every moment I spent with you, the terms of that damnable contract became more and more unbearable. I was not choosing a bride from a list. I was trying to find a way to earn the woman I wanted, a woman I knew this piece of paper could never buy. He looked at me then, his soul in his eyes. The contract was my mistake, but you, Ilara, you are the one thing I have done right. My anger had been a shield, but his confession slipped beneath it. A key turning in a lock I had not known was there. The truth of his words resonated with the truth I had felt in the library, on the garden path. The contract was a fact, a cold and ugly one.
But the man standing before me, his heart laid bare, felt like a different kind of truth altogether. A truth I was terrified to believe, and even more terrified to lose. His confession hung in the air, a fragile, shimmering thing. He did not press me for an answer, but stood there, vulnerable, waiting. I saw then that the Duke of Blackwood, the man who held the fate of my family in his hands, had placed his own fate in mine. He had already begun to act, not as a man enforcing a contract, but as one protecting the woman he loved. He explained, his voice low and steady, how he had spent the last week not arranging a wedding, but meeting with my father's creditors, settling the most pressing accounts with his own funds, creating a firewall around Oakhaven that would protect it, and, by extension, me, whether I accepted him or not. He was not buying me, he was freeing me.
"I have made arrangements," he said, his gaze earnest. "Your father's finances are being put in order. The threat of ruin is gone. You are under no obligation, Ilara. The contract, I will tear it up. You will be free, free to stay here, free to go wherever you wish. I ask for nothing." But his eyes asked for everything.
"And what of you, Alistair?" I asked, the name feeling natural on my lips now, a claim of intimacy. A muscle worked in his jaw. "I will have the neighbouring property," he said, a faint, wry twist to his lips, "and the memory of a conversation about Tacitus." The admission was so understated, so full of longing, that it undid the last of my resistance.
"You are a fool," I said softly, a ghost of a smile touching my own lips, "to go to all that trouble." Relief washed over his features, so profound it was as if he had been holding his breath since the moment I confronted him. "I have been a fool my entire life, Ilara. It is only since meeting you that I have begun to feel wise." He reached out then, not to touch me, but to gesture toward the small, worn cameo pinned at my throat, a piece my mother had left me. "From the first moment, I saw you were not like them. You wore your mother's memory, not a new bauble. You carried a book, not a dance card. You were real, in a house full of artifice." This was it. This was the moment of choice. Not the choice between him and another man, but the choice between the past I had always known, a life of quiet endurance and invisibility, and a future that was terrifying in its brightness. To accept him was to step into the light, to become visible to the whole world. I took a deep breath. "I accept," I said. The words were quiet, but they felt like a vow. "Not the contract, not the arrangement. I accept you, Alistair." A slow, deep and shaking sigh escaped him. He closed the distance between us and took my hand, his touch firm and warm. "Then we shall face them together." Our alliance was solidified not a moment too soon. The battle, I realised, was not yet won.
My acceptance of Alistair was a private victory, but Beatrice's ambitions were a very public threat. She had been banking everything on Rosamond capturing the Duke. My sudden elevation from family burden to future Duchess was a turn of events she could not and would not accept. The stage for the final confrontation was, fittingly, a grand ball hosted by our county's leading family, the Ashworths. It was to be my first official appearance on Alistair's arm. Beatrice had insisted the entire family attend, her smile a brittle, terrifying thing. She was planning something. The air in our house crackled with her unspoken machinations. Alistair sent a gift to my room before we left. A gown of deep sapphire velvet that matched my eyes, he wrote in the accompanying note. It was simple, elegant, and utterly perfect. When I came down the stairs, he was waiting in the hall. The look in his eyes was a suit of armour, a promise of protection. My father looked on, bewildered and slightly afraid. Rosamond, to my surprise, gave me a genuine, dazzling smile. "You look beautiful, Ilara," she whispered. "Truly." In that moment, I saw that she was not my rival, but another victim of our mother's ambition. The ballroom was a dazzling kaleidoscope of jewels, silks, and forced smiles. Heads turned as we entered, a wave of whispers following in our wake. The formidable Duke of Blackwood, who had not been seen at a social event in over a year, was here.
And on his arm was not the celebrated beauty Rosamond Pierce, but her plain, quiet older sister. The curiosity was palpable. We danced. Alistair held me securely, his hand warm at the small of my back, guiding me through the steps with an easy grace. For the first time in my life, I did not feel clumsy or out of place on a dance floor. I felt cherished. "Are you ready?" he murmured, his lips close to my ear. "I am with you," I replied, and it was all the answer he needed. Beatrice made her move after the supper. She cornered Lady Ashworth, her voice just loud enough to carry, a pitch of manufactured distress. "Oh, my dear, it is a tragedy. My poor, simple stepdaughter, Ilara. The Duke, in his grief, has been so susceptible. She has played on his kindness, you see, trapped him. There is a contract, a sordid business arrangement. She has forced his hand. It is a humiliation for us all." The poison spread through the room with breathtaking speed. The whispers grew louder, now laced with scandal. I saw old acquaintances look at me with pity or with scorn. I felt the familiar cloak of shame settling over me, the weight of their judgment. But then I looked at Alistair. His face was calm, his grey eyes steady. He gave my hand a reassuring squeeze. The shame evaporated, replaced by a cold, clear resolve. I would not be their victim. Beatrice, emboldened, approached us, her face a mask of sorrowful concern. "Your Grace," she said, dabbing a lace handkerchief at her dry eyes, "I must beg you, for the sake of your own good name, release my poor misguided stepdaughter from this farce. She does not know what she is doing." This was my moment. Before Alistair could speak, I stepped forward. My voice did not tremble. "On the contrary, Beatrice," I said, my tone even and clear. "For the first time in my life, I know exactly what I am doing." A hush fell over the small crowd that had gathered around us. "This has nothing to do with contracts," I continued, my gaze sweeping over the curious faces. "And it has nothing to do with pity. It has to do with a shared love for Roman history, a respect for botany, and the quiet understanding that can grow between two people when they stop performing for the benefit of others.
I looked directly at my stepmother. Something you would know nothing about. Beatrice's jaw dropped. She had expected a wilting flower, not this.
Alistair then played his hand. "Lady Beatrice is right about one thing," he said, his voice carrying easily through the silent room. "There was a contract." He produced a sheaf of papers from his coat pocket. Not the original, but copies of my father's desperate pleading letters. A contract begged for by Sir Reginald to save him from ruin. A contract which I have just had the pleasure of rendering null and void by settling his debts myself. He let that sink in. The only part of the agreement I have any intention of honouring is the part I added myself, in my own heart. I have asked Ilara to be my wife not to satisfy an agreement, but because I love her. Because she is the most intelligent, honourable and fascinating woman I have ever had the privilege of knowing. He turned to me, ignoring the stunned faces of everyone around us, and his eyes were full of a deep and abiding love. She is not the woman I was supposed to choose. She is the woman who chose me by simply being herself. The defeat of my father and stepmother was absolute. Their social ruin was swift and silent. They were not condemned by shouts, but by the turning of backs, the averted eyes, the sudden chill in the air. They had been exposed not merely as ambitious, but as cruel and foolish. We left the ball not in shame, but in triumph. We did not go straight home. Alistair directed the carriage to Blackwood Manor. We walked, not to the grand drawing room, but to the library. It was a vast, beautiful room, smelling of old paper and beeswax, the moonlight slanting in long silver ribbons through the tall windows. A fire crackled in the hearth, a welcoming warmth against the cool night. "Welcome home, Ilara," Alistair said softly. Home. The word settled in my heart, a perfect, peaceful weight. I ran my hand over a leather spine, the reality of it all sinking in. All these books, all this quiet. Alistair came to stand behind me.
He did not touch me, but I could feel the heat of him, the steady presence I had come to rely on. "I have something for you," he murmured. He reached past me to a small carved wooden box on a nearby table. He opened it and took out a small, exquisitely carved wooden horse. It was clearly old, worn smooth by time and touch. "It was my brother's," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "He carved it the winter before he died. I haven't shown it to anyone." He placed it in my palm. It was light, but it felt heavy with meaning, with trust. He was sharing his grief with me, not as a burden, but as a gift. It was the final piece of his past, the last lock on his heart. I closed my fingers around the small horse. "Thank you," I whispered. He finally placed his hands on my shoulders, gently turning me to face him. The moonlight cast his face in silver and shadow. "I have one more question for you, Ilara Pierce," he said, his voice a low, intimate rumble. "And this one is not in any contract." He leaned in, and the world narrowed to the space between us, to the scent of wood smoke and the warmth of his breath, to the clear, steady grey of his eyes. And then he kissed me. It was not a kiss of frantic passion, but of deep, profound recognition. It was a kiss that spoke of quiet libraries and rainy afternoons, of shared secrets and silent understanding. It was the final, unwritten clause, a promise of a lifetime of conversations yet to come. It was the feeling of being utterly, completely, and finally seen. Weeks later, we were married in the small chapel at Blackwood. It was a quiet affair, attended only by my sister Rosamond, who was genuinely happy for me,
and Alistair's formidable aunt, who had looked me over, given a brisk nod of approval, and declared me a sensible choice. Our life took on a rhythm of quiet joy. The days were filled with the business of running the estate, a task I found I had a surprising aptitude for, and the evenings were ours, spent in the library, reading aloud, or simply sitting in comfortable silence, the wooden horse resting on the mantelpiece, a quiet guardian of our peace. Alistair's grief for his brother did not vanish, but it softened, the sharp edges worn smooth by shared memory and new happiness. The severity in his face was replaced by a gentle contentment. My father and Beatrice removed themselves to a small cottage in Bath, their London ambitions dashed. Rosamond, free from her mother's influence, blossomed. She eventually married a kind, land-owning squire, a love match that brought a genuine, unforced smile to her face. One crisp autumn afternoon, a year after our wedding, Alistair and I were walking on the ridge overlooking the valley, the same path I had walked with him on that first terrifying day. The wind whipped strands of hair from my bonnet, and I laughed, a sound that was still new and wonderful to me.
"What are you thinking about?"
Alistair asked, tucking a stray strand behind my ear, his touch familiar and dear. I looked out over the patchwork of fields, the great house of Blackwood nestled among the trees, and the distant, smaller shape of Oakhaven. I thought of the girl in the grey dress, hiding in the shadows, listening to her fate being decided. I thought of the anger and betrayal I had felt, and the terrifying hope that had refused to be extinguished. I was thinking about a conversation I overheard. "Through a door that was not fully closed," I said. "My father said I would be grateful for anyone." Alistair's hand tightened on mine. He looked at me, his love a tangible thing, a warmth that enveloped me completely. "He was wrong," Alistair said, his voice firm. "I am the one who is grateful." And in that moment, standing on the windy ridge, I knew he was right. I was not the one who had been chosen. In our own, quiet, unexpected way, we had chosen each other. I was no longer an anchor, a ghost, or an afterthought. I was the Duchess of Blackwood. I was Alara. And I was finally home.